these people have been so wonderful to me, and I have tried in my own way. Wonderful actors, actresses I've been with. Every one I have learned something from.
There are television shows that entertain, and then there are television shows that endure. The Big Valley, which first graced American screens in September of 1965, belongs firmly in the second category. For 4 seasons, this sweeping California ranch drama captivated audiences with its powerful performances, emotionally complex storylines, and a cast of characters that felt genuinely alive. Decades after the final episode aired, fans still discuss the Barkley family with the kind of warmth and passion usually reserved for real people rather than fictional characters. But beneath the surface of what viewers saw every week on the television screens, there existed a fascinating world of behind-the-scenes decisions, unexpected personal stories, missed opportunities, and quiet triumphs that most fans never knew about. The making of the Big Valley was every bit as dramatic as the stories it told, and in some cases, even more surprising. From casting choices that nearly went a completely different direction, to personal sacrifices that changed Hollywood history, to the heartbreaking way the show came to its conclusion, the real story of the Big Valley is one worth telling in full. So settle in, because here are 25 weird and wonderful facts about the Big Valley that you almost certainly did not know. Fact 25. The show was originally built around the Suns. Before the Big Valley became the landmark drama that audiences remember today, it existed in a very different form. In the earliest stages of development, the creative team at 4-Star Television envisioned a relatively conventional Western series. The focus would rest primarily on the Barkley sons, with the drama driven by cattle conflicts, land disputes, and the kind of rugged frontier action that had already proven successful in shows like Wagon Train and The Rifleman. It was a safe concept, built around familiar territory. The mother figure was part of the story, certainly, but she occupied a supporting position rather than a central one. She would be present in the background, providing warmth and domestic stability while her sons handled the real business of the ranch and the dangers of the frontier world. This version of the show would have been perfectly watchable, perhaps even reasonably successful, but it would not have been extraordinary. What changed everything was a single creative decision that reoriented the entire premise. Someone in the development process asked a genuinely bold question. What if the mother was not just part of the family, but the most powerful person in it? What if she ran the ranch, commanded respect from everyone around her, and drove the story forward with the same authority and strength typically reserved for male leads? That question transformed the series from something ordinary into something genuinely groundbreaking, and it set the stage for everything that followed. Fact 24. Barbara Stanwyck was not an easy signing. Once the decision was made to center the show around a strong maternal figure, the obvious challenge became finding someone who could actually embody that vision. The role required an actress of enormous presence, someone whose authority would be immediately believable and whose personal reputation would lend the entire production instant credibility. The answer seemed obvious: Barbara Stanwyck. The problem was that Stanwyck herself was far from certain she wanted the job. By the mid-1960s, she was one of the most decorated and respected actresses in Hollywood history, with a career stretching back to the silent film era. She had received 4 Academy Award nominations and worked with some of the greatest directors in cinema. For someone of her stature, accepting a weekly television series was not a straightforward decision. At that particular moment in entertainment history, many film stars still viewed television as a lesser medium, something appropriate for actors whose film careers had faded rather than for those still operating at the height of their powers. Stanwyck had already declined several television offers before the Big Valley came along. What finally persuaded her was the character itself. Victoria Barkley was not a decorative presence or conventional television housewife. She was a force of nature, a woman of intelligence, principle, and real authority. Stanwyck recognized something in that character that she found genuinely compelling, and she said yes. It was one of the most consequential decisions in television history. Fact 23. Stanwyck refused to act her age. When production began on the Big Valley, Barbara Stanwyck was 58 years old. In Hollywood, particularly for women, that age often came with certain expectations about what roles were appropriate and what physical demands were reasonable. Stanwyck had absolutely no interest in those expectations. From the very beginning of production, she made clear that she intended to perform as many of her own scenes as physically possible. This meant riding horses herself rather than simply mounting and dismounting for close-up shots. It meant participating in physically demanding scenes that many actresses decades younger might have delegated to stunt performers. It meant showing up to work with the energy, focus, and sheer competitive drive of someone half her age. Crew members who worked on the series later recalled being consistently amazed by her stamina and her refusal to accept any accommodation that might make her seem fragile or limited. When directors or producers suggested that a stunt double handle a particularly demanding sequence, Stanwyck would often push back, insisting on doing the work herself. She did eventually defer to doubles for the genuinely dangerous moments, but only after considerable persuasion. The attitude she brought to set every single day was infectious and set a tone for the entire production that elevated everyone around her. Fact 22. Lee Majors was a genuine gamble. While Barbara Stanwyck brought decades of experience and an unimpeachable reputation to the Big Valley, another key casting decision went in a completely opposite direction. When producers were searching for someone to play Heath Barkley, the illegitimate son whose arrival sets the entire emotional engine of the series in motion, they settled on a young man with almost no professional acting experience whatsoever. Lee Majors had appeared in virtually nothing before being cast in one of the show's most emotionally demanding roles. Heath Barkley was not a simple character. He carried layers of pain, resentment, longing, and pride that required real nuance to portray convincingly. Placing that responsibility on an untested newcomer was a significant risk, and there were certainly people involved in the production who had reservations about the decision. What made the difference, by most accounts, was Barbara Stanwyck herself. Rather than treating the inexperienced young actor with the kind of cool professional distance that veteran stars sometimes maintain with newcomers, she took an active interest in his development. She offered guidance, shared her knowledge, encouraged him when his confidence wavered, and created a working environment in which he felt supported enough to grow into the role. Majors later spoke openly about how much her generosity meant to him during those first difficult weeks on set. The gamble paid off, and Heath Barkley became one of the most beloved characters the show produced. Fact 21. Richard Long never planned to be an actor. Of all the unlikely origin stories among the cast of The Big Valley, perhaps the most genuinely surprising belongs to Richard Long, who played the eldest Barkley son Jared. Unlike many of his colleagues who had pursued acting from an early age or studied the craft seriously before their careers began, Long stumbled into the profession almost entirely by accident. As a student, Long chose to take a drama class for reasons that had nothing to do with any particular passion for the stage. The class simply seemed less demanding than other available options, and he signed up without any particular ambition or expectation. What he did not anticipate was that he would be seen. During a school production, a casting professional happened to be in the audience and noticed something in Long's natural ease and presence on stage that suggested genuine potential. That chance encounter led to conversations, encouragement, and eventually a professional opportunity that launched a career Long had never imagined for himself. It is one of those strange quirks of entertainment history that the actor who would go on to portray the calm, reasonable, and thoughtful Jared Barkley, a character who seemed precisely the kind of person who plans carefully and acts deliberately, arrived in his profession almost entirely without intention. Fact 20. Linda Evans and Barbara Stanwyck were neighbors. The relationship between Linda Evans and Barbara Stanwyck on The Big Valley was one of the most warmly remembered aspects of the entire production. What began as a professional arrangement between two actresses playing mother and daughter eventually grew into something that both women described as genuinely personal and meaningful. Evans, who was in her early 20s during the run of the show and still developing her skills as a performer, was not always the most focused presence on set in the early going. Stanwyck, whose professional standards were exacting and whose work ethic was legendary, occasionally found this frustrating. But rather than dismissing the younger actress or creating a chilly professional distance, Stanwyck engaged with Evans in a way that gradually built real mutual respect and affection. Off-camera, the connection deepened further when it emerged that the two women lived extraordinarily close to one another, reportedly on the same street. This geographical proximity meant that their relationship extended beyond the boundaries of the set and into something more resembling an actual friendship between neighbors. Evans eventually began referring to Stanwyck as Mom even when the cameras were not rolling, a detail that speaks volumes about the authentic warmth between them. Fact 19. The cast genuinely functioned like a family. Television productions are workplaces, and like most workplaces, they can sometimes involve people who are perfectly professional with one another without ever developing any genuine personal connection. The Big Valley was, by most accounts of those who worked on it, quite different from that model. Barbara Stanwyck's approach to her colleagues set the tone for the entire ensemble. She invested real time and energy in the people around her, forming genuine friendships with cast members including Lee Majors and Peter Breck, and consistently making herself available to support less experienced performers. She did not maintain the kind of hierarchy that her status would have fully entitled her to maintain. The result was a working environment that felt unusually collaborative and warm, and that warmth translated directly into what appeared on screen. The chemistry between the Barkley family members felt real to audiences because, in a meaningful sense, it was real. The actors genuinely liked and respected one another, and that invisible foundation of authentic relationship gave every scene they shared together a quality that could not have been manufactured through technique alone. Fact 18. 2 attempted spin-offs both failed. When a television series achieves genuine popularity, the temptation to expand its universe is almost irresistible. The producers of The Big Valley were not immune to this impulse, and during the show's run, 2 separate spin-off concepts were developed with the intention of building on the original series' success. The first proposed spin-off centered on a character called Sheriff Dave Barrett, with actor Van Williams attached to the lead role. The concept would have followed law enforcement in the same frontier world as the Barkley family, exploring a different angle on the themes of justice and community that ran through the parent series. The second concept took a more exotic direction, focusing on a character named Sajid Khan, who had appeared as an Indian prince in an episode called The Royal Road. The idea presumably would have followed this character's adventures in a format quite distinct from the California ranch setting of the original. Neither project made it past the development stage. Both were abandoned before production began, leaving them as historical footnotes and reminders that the particular chemistry that made the Big Valley work was not easily replicated or transferred to new contexts. Fact 17. The storylines were emotionally heavier than most westerns. On the surface, the Big Valley looked like many other westerns of its era. There were horses and ranches, frontier conflicts and period costumes. But what the show was actually doing beneath that familiar surface was considerably more ambitious and emotionally complex than most of its genre contemporaries. The central premise of Heath Barkley's story is, when examined honestly, genuinely dark. He is a man who arrives at the home of a family he has never met, bearing proof that the man who built everything they have was his biological father, a man who had an affair and never acknowledged him. His arrival forces every member of the Barkley family to confront painful truths about someone they loved and revered. Victoria must process the knowledge that her husband had a secret son. Her children must grapple with the existence of a half-brother who represents a betrayal of their family. The show did not shy away from the complexity of these emotional realities. It allowed characters to feel genuinely conflicted, to behave badly and then reckon with their behavior, to change slowly and imperfectly over time. For a primetime Western in the mid-1960s, this level of emotional sophistication was genuinely unusual. Fact 16. Richard Long almost left after the first season. Richard Long's portrayal of Jared Barkley was one of the most quietly effective performances in the entire series. Jared was the intellectual of the family, the lawyer and strategist who approached problems with careful reasoning rather than instinct or force. Long brought a genuine intelligence and restraint to the role that made him an essential counterweight to the more volatile characters around him. Despite the quality of his work, Long grew increasingly dissatisfied during contract negotiations following the first season. His concern was straightforward. Jared was being sidelined. While Heath and Nick received storylines that put them at the center of dramatic conflict week after week, Jared often found himself reacting to events rather than driving them. For an actor of Long's ability, playing the voice of reason in someone else's drama could feel limiting. The tensions during negotiations were significant enough that his departure from the series appeared genuinely possible for a period. In the end, the issues were resolved and Long remained with the show for its entire 4-season run. But the episode stands as a reminder that even productions with strong ensemble chemistry are never entirely free of the individual anxieties and ambitions that drive the people involved in them. Fact 15. Nick Barkley was based on a real person. Among the Barkley siblings, Nick was the most immediately vivid, the loudest voice in any room, the quickest to anger and the most passionate in his loyalties. Peter Breck's portrayal of the character crackled with an energy that could sometimes feel almost too large for the screen to contain. What many viewers did not know was that Nick Barkley was not purely a creation of the writer's imaginations. Breck has spoken about drawing on the memory of an actual rancher he had known during his younger years when developing the character. This man was someone for whom the land was not simply a business asset but an almost spiritual commitment, something he would protect with ferocity because it represented everything that mattered to him. The frustration and heat that sometimes came off this real individual as anger or stubbornness were actually expressions of a much deeper and more vulnerable attachment. Understanding that origin changes how Nick Barkley reads as a character. His volatility is not simply a personality quirk or a dramatic device. It is the outward expression of someone who cares so profoundly about what he has and who he loves that he cannot always find measured or graceful ways to show it. Breck's performance, rooted in that real human observation, gave Nick a dimension that purely invented characters often lack. Fact 14. The ranch was completely real. During the 1960s, the standard approach to Western television production involved a significant amount of creative deception. Studio backlots had been designed and refined over decades specifically to simulate frontier environments convincingly enough for black and white, and later color, television cameras. Painted backdrops, constructed facades, and carefully managed lighting allowed producers to suggest vast open landscapes while actually shooting a few hundred yards from a Los Angeles soundstage. The team behind the Big Valley made a different choice. The exterior sequences of the Barkley Ranch were filmed on an actual working ranch located in California's San Joaquin Valley. This decision introduced real practical complications: unpredictable weather, the rhythms and demands of a functioning agricultural operation, and the logistical challenges of moving a film crew and all its equipment to a genuine rural location on a regular basis. But the results were undeniable. The landscape that appeared on screen had a quality of authenticity that no studio backlot could fully replicate. The light was real. The dust was real. The distances were real. The animals were real. That investment in genuine location work gave the series a visual credibility that distinguished it from many of its contemporaries, and that holds up remarkably well even when viewed today. Fact 18. Linda Evans helped shape her own character. When Linda Evans joined the Big Valley as Audra Barkley, the youngest daughter of the family, the character had been conceived in relatively modest terms. Audra was present in the story, but she was not intended to carry significant dramatic weight. She was the beautiful younger sister, a presence that humanized the family without demanding too much from the actress filling the role. What the producers discovered relatively quickly was that Evans brought considerably more to the part than the written character required. Her natural warmth, her emotional accessibility, and her instinctive understanding of how to communicate feeling through subtle physical choices made Audra consistently more interesting on screen than on the page. Writers began responding to what Evans was doing, expanding her storylines and finding new dimensions for the character to explore. The result was a collaborative evolution that turned Audra from a supporting player into one of the show's genuinely important presences. Evans was not simply performing a character someone else had fully created. She was participating in the ongoing development of who Audra Barkley actually was, a contribution that shaped the show's texture in ways that went beyond what any individual script specified. Fact 12. Multiple cast members had real military service. The actors who brought the Barkley family to life on screen were not simply performers playing at courage in a fictional world. Several of them had genuine military backgrounds that gave their portrayals of frontier determination and physical toughness an authenticity grounded in real experience. Richard Long served in the United States Army after being drafted during the Korean War era in 1950, an obligation that interrupted his early acting career for a significant period. Peter Breck, who played the passionate and fiercely loyal Nick Barkley, had served in the United States Navy years before his acting career took hold, an experience that likely contributed to the particular quality of disciplined commitment he brought to the role. Charles Briles, who played the youngest Barkley sibling Eugene in the first season, made a different kind of military choice during the Vietnam era, volunteering for the California National Guard rather than being drafted into active combat service. His decision to honor that commitment had direct consequences for the show, as explored in a later entry on this list. Fact 11. Stanwyck's Emmy win genuinely surprised her. In 1966, the television industry formally recognized what audiences had known from the beginning of the Big Valley's run. Barbara Stanwyck's performance as Victoria Barkley was something exceptional. She received the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Continued Performance by an actress in a leading role in a dramatic series, one of the most prestigious acknowledgments the medium could offer. What made the moment particularly memorable was Stanwyck's reaction to hearing her name announced. By virtually all accounts, her surprise was entirely genuine rather than the performative modesty that often characterizes award acceptance moments. She truly had not expected to win, and the emotion she displayed was unguarded and real in a way that moved those watching. There was an additional layer of meaning to the recognition. Stanwyck had spent much of her career in film, and like many film stars of her generation, she had maintained a certain ambivalence about television work. Now the television industry itself was celebrating her at the very highest level, acknowledging that what she had accomplished on the small screen was worthy of the same serious respect as anything she had done in cinema. Fact 10. Victoria Barkley was a radical television character. In the landscape of American television in 1965, female characters occupied a fairly predictable range of roles. They were wives and mothers, love interests and supporting players, presences that provided emotional warmth and domestic context for stories driven primarily by male protagonists. Even in westerns, where women were occasionally allowed somewhat more assertive roles, genuine authority and narrative centrality were almost exclusively male territories. Victoria Barkley was something genuinely different. She did not run the Barkley Ranch by virtue of circumstance or as a temporary arrangement until the men could take over. She ran it because she was the best person for the job, and everyone around her, including the men of the community who were not accustomed to answering to a woman, accepted this without the show feeling the need to make a dramatic point of it. That naturalness was perhaps the most radical thing about the character. The show did not frame Victoria's authority as remarkable or exceptional. It simply presented a competent, intelligent woman in charge and proceeded from there. In 1965, that quiet confidence was quietly revolutionary. Fact 9. The show confronted real social issues. The Western genre has always offered American storytellers a particular kind of creative freedom, the ability to examine contemporary social questions through the safely distanced lens of historical settings. The Big Valley made consistent use of this possibility, addressing issues that were actively contested and deeply painful in 1960s America through stories set in the frontier California of the previous century. Episodes examined the treatment of Chinese immigrant laborers who contributed enormously to the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad while receiving minimal legal protection and widespread discrimination. Other stories addressed the systematic dispossession of Mexican families from land they had held for generations. The treatment of Native American communities by the expanding American state appeared repeatedly as a theme throughout the series. None of this was handled as abstract historical commentary. The show put specific human faces on these large injustices and told their stories with genuine emotional investment. For a primetime entertainment program in an era when the civil rights movement was actively reshaping American society, this kind of storytelling represented a meaningful choice about what popular culture could and should do. Fact 8. Charles Briles left the show for military service. In the first season of The Big Valley, the Barkley family included a fifth sibling who would later vanish from the story without explanation. Eugene Barkley, played by Charles Briles, was the youngest of the family's children and the most academically oriented, a medical student whose character represented a different kind of aspiration than the ranch-oriented world of his siblings. During the escalating American involvement in Vietnam, Briles received a military draft notice. Rather than seek a deferment or attempt to manage the situation in a way that would allow him to continue his acting career, he chose to fulfill his obligation by enrolling in the California National Guard. This decision made his continued participation in the series impossible. The show's writers responded to his departure by quietly writing Eugene out of the story rather than recasting the role with a different actor. The character simply stopped appearing, with no dramatic farewell or explanatory storyline. It was an understated exit that nonetheless reflected a real young man making a real sacrifice in response to the circumstances of his time. Fact 7. The show drew extraordinary guest stars. The Big Valley's combination of strong writing, prestige casting, and genuine popularity made it an unusually attractive destination for guest performers across its four-season run. The list of actors who appeared in individual episodes reads as a remarkable cross-section of mid-century American entertainment. William Shatner appeared on the show before his career was transformed by Star Trek. Richard Dreyfuss made an early television appearance in the series before his film career established him as one of Hollywood's leading actors. The brilliant comedic actress Cloris Leachman brought her particular energy to an episode. Milton Berle, one of the foundational figures of American television comedy, appeared in a dramatic context quite different from his usual wake. Perhaps the most unexpected name on the guest roster was Regis Philbin, then primarily known as a game show personality, who appeared in an episode titled The Challenge. The breadth of this guest list reflects how thoroughly the Big Valley had established itself as a legitimate cultural landmark rather than simply another entry in a crowded genre. Fact 6. The show operated in Bonanza's shadow. During its run, the Big Valley competed for audiences, critical attention, and industry recognition in an environment dominated by another family western that had arrived on television several years earlier. Bonanza, NBC's massively successful drama about the Cartwright family and their Nevada ranch, had established itself as one of American television's most popular programs by the time the Big Valley debuted. The comparison was inevitable and not always flattering to the newer show. Bonanza had the advantage of precedence, of a larger established audience, and of the kind of cultural momentum that comes from years of consistent success. In raw ratings terms, it generally outperformed the Big Valley throughout the period when both shows were on the air. But the critical reassessment that began even during the original run and has continued in the decades since suggests a more nuanced picture. Many television historians and critics have argued that the Big Valley storytelling, particularly its willingness to explore emotional complexity and social content, offered something qualitatively different from Bonanza's more straightforward frontier adventure. Being second in popularity did not mean being second in substance. Fact 5. Victoria's costume design was a deliberate statement. The choices made by the costume department of a television series often go unacknowledged by viewers, but they are rarely accidental. In the case of the Big Valley, the decisions made about how to dress Victoria Barkley were as carefully considered as any aspect of the character's development. Rather than placing Stanwyck's character in the elaborate and decorative frontier gowns that Western dramas sometimes use to signal feminine refinement, the designers consistently put Victoria in practical, working clothes. Riding attire, functional ranch clothing, garments suited to someone who actually spent time outdoors managing a large agricultural operation. The message was clear and consistent. This was a woman defined by what she did, not by how she appeared. The effect was precisely calibrated to reinforce everything the show wanted to say about Victoria's character. Without a word of dialogue, her clothing established her as someone of substance and capability. Even in her quieter domestic moments, the practicality of her wardrobe communicated a woman who expected to be taken seriously and consistently was. Fact 4. Lee Majors had to tone down Midnight Cowboy. The role of Heath Barkley made Lee Majors a recognizable face in American households, but the success of the Big Valley came with a cost that became clear when he was offered one of the most significant film opportunities of the late 1960s. Majors was sought for the role of Joe Buck in Midnight Cowboy, the John Schlesinger film that would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture and transform the careers of everyone centrally involved in its making. The character was a natural fit for Majors' particular qualities as a performer, and the opportunity represented the kind of career-defining moment that actors hope for throughout their professional lives. The problem was his contractual commitment to the Big Valley. The show had been renewed for another season, and his obligations could not be set aside simply because a remarkable film opportunity had presented itself. Majors had to decline, and the role went instead to Jon Voight, who received an Academy Award nomination for his performance and launched a film career of sustained distinction. It remains one of the more poignant missed opportunities in entertainment history. Fact 3. The show's influence reached decades forward. The legacy of the Big Valley extends considerably further than its 4-season run might initially suggest. The structural and thematic choices the show made during its time on the air helped establish templates that subsequent television dramas would develop in new directions for decades to come. The most significant of these contributions was the model of the powerful family unit, led by a matriarch of genuine authority, navigating the intersection of wealth, principle, and personal loyalty. When Dallas arrived in the late 1970s and Dynasty followed in the 1980s, redefining the primetime drama for a new generation, they were building on creative foundations that the Big Valley had helped establish. The idea that family power and its complications could sustain a long-running dramatic series, that audiences would invest deeply in the internal conflicts and moral struggles of a single wealthy household, was something the Big Valley demonstrated convincingly at a moment when it was not yet obvious that this approach would work. The show also contributed to evolving the role of women in television drama in ways that continued to unfold long after its cancellation, helping to establish that female characters could lead rather than support without requiring any justification or explanation. Fact 2. Stanwyck defended the show for the rest of her life. The entertainment industry has a long tradition of performers who quietly distance themselves from their television work once it is finished, treating the medium as a necessary commercial interlude between more artistically serious film projects. Barbara Stanwyck was emphatically not one of those performers. Throughout her later years, she spoke consistently and forcefully about the Big Valley as work she was genuinely proud of, refusing to accept the premise that the circumstances of its production, a weekly television series rather than a theatrical film, made it any less worthy of serious artistic consideration. She treated her portrayal of Victoria Barkley as she had treated her greatest film roles, with complete commitment during production and with genuine pride in retrospect. This was not simply loyalty or professional courtesy. Stanwyck genuinely believed that the quality of acting mattered more than the format in which it appeared, and she was unwilling to pretend otherwise simply because certain critical hierarchies treated film as inherently superior to television. Her consistent defense of the show in her later interviews stands as one of the more principled positions any performer of her generation took about the relative value of different entertainment media. Fact 1. The show never got to say goodbye. Of all the facts about the Big Valley that carry genuine emotional weight, perhaps none is more affecting than this final one. When the last episode of the series was filmed, nobody on set knew it would be the last episode. The cameras were put away, the sets were struck, and the cast and crew dispersed at the end of what everyone assumed was simply a season's work, expecting to return. The decision to cancel the show came afterward, when production had already finished and the opportunity to create a proper farewell had passed without anyone realizing it needed to be seized. There was no final episode written to provide closure. There was no chance for the writers to resolve the storylines that had been building. There was no opportunity for the cast to say goodbye to characters they had inhabited for years, or for those characters to say goodbye to the audience that had followed them faithfully. The Barkley family story simply stops, mid-chapter, as though someone turned off the lights while the party was still in progress. For many fans, this abrupt and unintended ending has remained a source of genuine sadness for decades. And yet, paradoxically, it may also be one of the reasons the show continues to occupy such a vivid place in the memories of those who watched it. Something that never properly ended never fully goes away. The Barkleys are still out there somewhere in that California valley, living a story that simply ran out of time before it could be told to its conclusion. And perhaps that is why, more than half a century later, people are still talking about them.